Good morning, everyone. My name is Caroline O'Keefe, and I'm from Revenue's Brexit unit. And I'm here to speak to you today about tariff classification and customs valuation. Now, they're both very heavy topics, but they're really critical that you get this part right in relation to your products, so as that you'll be able to, or whoever is acting on your behalf will be able to complete the customs formalities for you. So I'm going to start out with classification of your goods. So I'm sure at this stage, for any of you that are brand new to customs, you've probably heard these words and codes bandied around: HS codes, Tariff codes, CN codes. And we'll cover a little tiny bit of that later on. But for clarity today and just for simplicity, what we're going to call the code is a classification code. So we'll move on to the meat now of the presentation. So what is classification? Well, the legal explanation for it is that we are trying to reach a decision on the classification code for a particular product. And that sounds quite simple, but I've just put up on the screen here some examples of some of the more challenging products that have been before classifiers over the years. And if you look on the top left-hand side there, slippers or shoes. If something, are they slippers or are they sliders, and therefore shoes? And there's an importance related to all of this because your classification code dictates the rate of customs duty payable on the importation of those goods. We have on the right-hand side a confectionery item, probably familiar to a lot of you, a Jaffa cake. Well, is it a biscuit or is it a cake? Our clothing, is it knitted or woven? So they're the kind of questions that come around when we go to look at the classification of goods. So if you just bear that in mind as we go through the presentation here today, and I'll give you an example then, a very simple example of classifying goods. So that's what, hopefully you understand now what tariff classification is. And now if we look and see, well, why do we need to classify our goods? Well, I mentioned already the main reason why we classify our goods is so that we can know what rate of customs duty is applicable to those goods. So once we know where the goods are coming from, the origin of the goods, and we have our classification code, then we know the rate of duty payable when we import those goods. And that's very important for you as the importer to decide, are you going to import these goods if you have to pay a certain rate of duty? But your customers, if you're an exporter, it's really important for your customers in the UK as well, because they want to know how much they will have to pay when they import your product into the UK market. The other reason for classification is to find out what restrictions, if any, apply to your goods. Our colleagues from agriculture spoke here yesterday about the various requirements if you're bringing in certain products into Ireland. So you need to know in advance what restrictions are applicable to your goods so that you can make an informed decision as to whether you're going to go ahead with that purchase or not. Now, I mentioned already about the various codes. I'm not going to stay on these. These are just takeaways you can take away at your own time and look at. 6 digits is HS, 8 digits is what you need at export, that's a CN code, and then 10 digits is what you need when you're importing goods, and that will give you the rate of customs duty on bringing those goods into Ireland. And that just gives you an idea of the structure of it. You have a chapter, a heading and a subheading and so on down. But I think it's easiest, before I go on to explain to you how we go about classifying, if you do have any questions and you'd like to participate, just go to slido.com, and for those of you who are just tuning into this event, that's the event code there that you just key into slido.com. So let's move on now to an example of classifying goods. As I said, you need a 10-digit code if you're importing goods into Ireland, and if you're exporting goods, it's the 8-digit CN code. So for any of you earlier at our import sessions yesterday, we had our company called, I can't even remember now, Posh Frocks Limited, that were bringing in some dresses in from the UK. So if you can do this for all of your products, it will help you classify your own goods. So these are key questions down the left-hand side that if you're able to answer them, that will greatly assist you in classifying your goods. So what is the product? It's a lady's dress. It's a mix of sizes and colours. What's it made from? We've got from our supplier that it's made from cotton. And then how is it manufactured? Well, it's a woven fabric. So armed with that information now, I am now going to be able to move on and see about classifying these particular goods. There are various tools available to me. There's explanatory notes. There's, if you're bringing in chemicals, there's the EKICS database. There's an EU learning module. all details of this are available on the Revenue website. But for today's purposes, I'm going to go into the EUTaric, and that's the European Union database of all the classification codes that are used throughout the European Union and that have associated with it all of the restrictions and rates of duty, etc., associated with those tariff classification codes. So I scroll down through the tariff and I come to chapter 62 of the tariff, which shows me that articles of apparel and clothing accessories not knitted or crocheted. Okay, the language is a bit archaic, but the codes have been with us for a long, long time and they've stood the test of time. So that works for me anyway. I'm in an area, it's an article of apparel and it's not knitted or crocheted. So I go a bit further at 4 digits and I see my dresses are here. You can see there it's women's dresses and I'm saying yes, I'm at 4 digits already. And as you can see halfway down the page, one of the options there is dresses. So by clicking on that, it now brings me down to 6-digit level. And you can see there's a number of drop-down options. I know my dress is of cotton, so I'm able to click into that and I'm at a 10-digit level. So I have a choice between two. My dress isn't hand printed by the batik method, unfortunately. I can't afford that. So it's the other. So in that instance then, we're now at our 10-digit tariff code. So what we're able to do next then is look and see, well, what rate of customs duty do I have to pay if I'm importing that product into Ireland? Now, at the moment, you can't check this on the Tariff code for the UK because the UK is still an EU member state, but you can put in a different country like the US or China or something like that. So in this instance, anyway, I've put it in and you can see down on the bottom right-hand side there that the rate of duty applicable for this particular classification code is 12%. So that's a very simple example of the classification of goods. But if you are unable to classify products yourself, Revenue offers a classification opinion service. You submit, you answer those same questions again that I included in the list earlier. And it's not a legally binding classification opinion, but it is going to give you your classification codes for your goods once you're able to supply that information to us. If there's any kind of doubt about your classification code and you're not happy with a classification opinion, then you can always go for binding tariff information. Now, this is a classification decision which would be issued if you applied in Ireland. It'll be issued by Irish Customs. It's legally binding across all EU member states. It only applies to one product only and generally has a validity of 3 years. It can be invalidated for various reasons. But because it is a legally binding decision, you do need to follow set legal processes in order to obtain it, and you do need to supply significant information to Revenue to be able to reach a classification decision for you in the format of a binding tariff information. So listed out here, you must have a Ross Digital Search, you must be registered, and key again, as we've said throughout yesterday and today, you need to have a EURI number. So that is another option if you wish in relation to the classification of your goods. So to recap then in relation to classification, what do you need to do if you're an importer or an exporter or an agent, a logistics company? What do you need to do now in relation to classification? Well, what we're saying to you as the importer is go out now and classify all of the products that you know that you are bringing into Ireland from the UK. You need to get that 10-digit classification code for all of those individual products. And secondly, then you need to share that information with the entity who is doing your customs declaration, because that must be included on the import declaration. In relation, if you're the exporter, well, then you're going to need an 8-digit classification code for your export declaration, and also your customers in the UK are going to be looking for information on your product as well. So again, you need to go there and classify all of the goods that you sell to your UK customers, and you need to share that information with the agent or the partner who is completing your customs formalities. And for customs agents and logistics companies, we're asking you to engage with all of your customers and highlight and raise awareness of the requirement for classification to be done now when you still have these few months left in order to go out and classify your goods, and ensure that before you take on a contract for doing import or export declarations that you have the classification codes for all of the goods that are being moved. So that's the very quickest run through I think I've ever done on classification. The contact details and website information is there. We will be doing a bit of Q&A on this when I follow through, when I finish off on the valuation side. So then we come to customs valuation, and that's really, really closely linked to the classification as well. They go hand in hand. So why do I need a customs value? Well, we've identified now, we know what rate of duty that's payable on the import of your goods. Now you need to know, well, how much customs duty am I going to pay on bringing in those goods? So I need a value, because I have to multiply the value by the rate of duty. I also need to know how much VAT is payable. Now, there are other reasons as well. For statistical purposes, you'll always see in the CSO figures that there'll be a monetary amount of money associated with imports and exports of goods as well. So that's why we need a valuation. Nothing is ever straightforward with customs. There are 6 valuation methods in place. But for today, we are simply going to look at the transaction value method, because it's the first of them. You can't move on to the next ones unless you cannot value on the basis of the transaction value. But 99% of all valuations are done using this transaction value, so that's what we're going to focus on today. So the transaction value is the invoice value. So with the invoice value, then you can have some additions. So, you must add some amounts to it, for instance, the transport cost of bringing those goods into Ireland. And then also there are some deductions that you're allowed to take. And again, here highlighted is for any of those transport costs that arise when the goods are within the territory of the European Union. So as I said, I'm going to look now at an example of a transaction value. And we'll reach a valuation but using this method. So we've said that it's the invoice value, and then we have to add some additional costs, and then we can do some and look at some deductions then. So we're back to our Posh Fox company from yesterday, and this is the invoice that we've been supplied with by our supplier in the UK for 20 dresses that are coming in at €45 each. So this is, I'm being invoiced in euros, and this is the invoice that I have received from my supplier. So the total value here on the invoice is €900. So now if we look and see, well, what transport costs did I pay to have those goods shipped to me in Ireland? The transport and insurance was €100, but €10 of that cost arose once the goods were within the European Union, so I'm allowed to deduct that €10. So in total, I've reached a value for customs purposes of €990. So now I have my customs value. Earlier on in the classification, we got our classification, our code. So now I have my rate of duty of 12%. I have my customs value of €990. A simple mathematics here then will give us a customs duty amount of €118. And if I am paying VAT at clearance, I use the customs value plus the customs duty added together, and I pay duty on that total amount. So that comes to over €1,000. So that's just a very simple example of reaching a customs valuation based on the invoice, which, as we say, is 99% of usage for valuation purposes. But those additions and deductions are really critical. If a customs value is incorrect, then there are significant implications for you as the importer. First of all, you'll have to correct your import declaration. Any customs duties owing will also have to be paid, but you will be subject then to penalties for misdeclaring on a customs import declaration. So it's really important to get that customs value right. So then, just to wrap up here then, just the key message again for the importers and the agents and logistics companies. If you are the importer, you need to establish the correct valuation of your goods. Confirm that you can use the invoice value as your as the basis for your valuation, and you need to share the customs valuation with the party who is completing your customs formalities. For agents and logistics companies, you may well need to share the details of the cost of the freight and insurance that you're charging your customer, and you must make sure that the value that you're getting from your customer is the correct customs value. So as I said, that's a very quick run through of customs classification and customs valuation. Full details are available on through the links on the presentation here, and all these presentations will be available to you. But now I'm going to move over to Linda and colleagues, and we have a Q&A panel then for questions. Thank you.
That's great, Caroline. Thanks very much for that whistle-stop tour through both the tariff classification and valuation. Some really informative stuff there. As and there's an awful lot of elements, I think, in behind this. And as we've said throughout a number of the presentations, really important that we get the detail right. Accuracy is really critical, I think, in all of the areas, but certainly, I think, particularly maybe in the valuation space, it is critical. So I'd like to welcome to the panel now, we have Patricia Redden from our tariff classification area and Jerry Corcoran from the valuation area. So thank you both for joining me today. Before we go into the Q&A, I understand that there are still some ongoing internet issues. Refreshing the screen seems to be working for people. And again, just to reassure you that the live transmission is the recorded output is working fine, and the videos will all be up on the Revenue website over the coming days. We will have all of yesterday's and all of today's up. So again, apologies for that. It's a technical issue outside of our control at the moment. So I'll move off. Maybe, Patricia, I might start with you with some classification questions. There's somebody has sent us a message here, but I've looked up Tariff. I can only find a third country duty. What is a third country duty?
The third country duty is the duty that's payable on any goods that are imported from a third country for which the EU does not have a free trade agreement. Which is a country like China, for instance. The EU don't have a free trade agreement, so that would any goods imported would incur third country duty.
So if we have no agreement with the UK by the end of this year, it will apply with GB?
It would be, yes, yeah.
Okay, and then maybe just another one to follow up with that. I'm still not sure of the code after looking up all the resources on the Revenue website. What can I do? I'm sure that's not, whoever has asked that question, I'm sure you're not on your own, but just maybe is there some guidance? How do they get at that code, at the classification?
Yes, as Caroline was saying on the presentation, you can contact Revenue through the My Inquiries is the best way because of confidential information that you might be providing, or through tarclass@revenue.ie. And we will take your query and provide an opinion. The opinion will not be legally binding, but it will provide you with the classification code.
So it'll be a very strong indicative advice, really.
Yes.
And that actually, you've reminded me there, because I know a number of queries have come in relation to the classification phone service, and which we're not currently providing. And I think it's really important to point out that it is confidential information that we're looking for, and equally the advice we want to give back, we want to be really sure of what it is that has been sought, so that we can really rely on the advice, albeit advice and guidance, but we want to be really sure that the advice we're giving back is solid and accurate and is based on what the business has put to us.
Exactly, and that's important to say, the opinion is based on the information that you provide, so you do need to provide as much information as you can based on, as Anne was outlining, the details of the product and the list of questions that was on the presentation.
That's great, yeah. And the contacts, I think, are covered in that.
Yeah.
Jerry, just maybe one looking at the valuation. How would I value a racehorse, for example? Now, I wonder, this may not be answerable because I wonder if this is a temporary admission piece, but how would I value a racehorse? It's not for sale. It's going from Ireland to the UK to race, or vice versa. Are we in a valuation space there, or are we in a temporary admission space?
We are in a temporary admission space, really.
Yeah. I think so. So we'll move on from that. Again, if you weren't on the temporary admissions, please check back in on that module or on the temporary admissions piece on the website. Patricia, in classification, I'm only bringing this product in once a year. Do I need a BTI, a binding tariff information?
Well, if you're bringing it in once a year, if there's any doubt about the tariff code, you could apply for the BTI, which will give legal certainty. But if you can get the classification code and you're confident of the classification code, it is probably not required, because a lot of information needs to be submitted when applying for a BTI. But the option is there. But if you're confident of the classification code, you wouldn't necessarily need a BTI for that product.
And in that scenario, it could be as well to just get the informal advice rather than going the, if you like, official route through a BTI for a single incident, if you like.
Yep.
Just when you mentioned the codes, questions have come in around what's the difference, or what is a HS code or a CN code?
Well, the
I think, I mean, Caroline did cover some, but whether people preempted before you got to that stage of the presentation, but you might just give a high-level view on HS code or CN code.
The HS code is the harmonised system. It's an international code. It's 6 digits, and it applies internationally. The CN code, then, the combined nomenclature, is the EU tariff classification code, and it adds an extra 2 digits, and it provides further information about the product for import or export.
Okay. I hope that's provided enough clarity on those. Jerry, from a valuation point of view, I know Caroline went through in her example kind of a costings case study, if you like. So I think where people are asking questions around specific valuation questions, I'm not sure that they're going to be readily answerable, but I'll pose the question anyway.
Okay.
I'm importing a car from the UK. What value do I declare? Now, I'm assuming there's going to be quite a number of variables here, but how do they approach that?
Well, I mean, that sounds like a transaction value. You declare the price you pay for the car. That sounds like a quite straightforward question.
Okay. And what sort of proof do they have to have? That is the invoice?
Well,
or?
the invoce, yeah.
Okay.
It's quite,
Okay.
that we debate.
More straightforward than I had anticipated, but thank you.
But sorry,
Yes,
you would
Patricia.
need to include the transport costs and the insurance costs for the transport of the car.
And they've to be added in for the valuation.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So then on the classification, Patricia, for companies exporting to the UK, will a BTI issued in Ireland be binding in the UK after the 1st of January?
It won't be binding in the UK. To get one that would be binding in the UK, you would need to apply to UK Customs HMRC. It would give a good indication of the classification, but it won't be binding in the UK.
Okay. And a moment ago, you've mentioned the additional costs that will go into the declared value. There's other questions around whether there's any freight charges that could be exempted from the valuation. Are there any freight charges exempt from the customs valuation?
Well, the freight charges inside the EU, as Caroline said, they're exempt from the customs valuation.
Okay.
You just count the freight charges to the point of entry into the EU.
Okay. Okay. So there is some exemption or that apply.
Yes, you can deduct the
Okay.
price.
Okay. Patricia, what happens if I make a mistake and use an incorrect classification code?
Well, the classification code would need to be corrected. If there's any duty due, that would have to be paid. There may be penalties depending on the circumstance of the incorrect classification.
Okay, and again, I think this is a message that I feel like I'm getting boring at this stage in repeating. It really is accuracy of all of the customs documentation, declarations, including classification valuation. Accuracy is really a critical point here, isn't it? Commodity code, is a commodity code the same as a classification code?
Yes, the commodity is the product, so the classification code is the commodity code.
And will the UK have the same tariff classification codes as us after the 1st of January?
On the 1st of January, it is likely that they will, because in terms of their draft tariff that they have issued, the classification codes do seem to follow the EU, but you can expect that over time there will be differences in the classifications. Okay. But the 6 digits, the first 6 digits, the harmonised system 6 digits, they're international, so they will stay the same. But the other digits will most likely change over time.
Where a lot of these features might be new to a business to engage with, there's been a lot of questions over all of the sessions we've done between today and yesterday about what party does what or can do what. And in terms of valuing, coming up with the valuation, who does it? If you're engaging an agent, will the agent do the valuation for you, or who does it?
Well, the agent will make the declaration, but he'll seek information from you, so you'll provide the information about the transport costs and the invoice price and so on.
So it really is the importer needs to have all of that information provided to the agent or whoever it is that's actually doing that transaction.
Yes, and they need to keep the records.
So I think, again, one of the messages around that is, and we'd spoken about it before, is that you can't devolve, even if you have other parties doing elements within the supply chain for you in terms of an import or an export. You really just can't devolve yourself of responsibility of knowing who's doing what, or even running the risk of assuming that somebody else is doing something for you. You really do need to be sure who's doing what, have they got all of the information that they need to complete that part of the transaction, and that you really can't just, pass it over. Agents looking after that, I've nothing to do here. So I think that probably is an important message. How long does it take to get a BTI decision?
BTI decision can take up to 120 days. We issue them as quickly as we can, but it depends on the amount of information, additional information that's required. There may be analysis of a product, so there are various different reasons why one BTI might take a shorter time and another one might take a longer time. We do have 120 days to issue it. This can be extended for various reasons by another 30 days, but we endeavour to issue them as soon as we can, basically.
I think when you're mentioning that figures, we keep referring to figures, and we're yet again on our final countdown, and 87 days today, 87 days to go, up to 120 days to process this or to make this decision. There's an obvious conflict there. So obviously we've said repeatedly, we absolutely consistently endeavour not to use the maximum time available. But you have 87 days. If this is something you envisage requiring in early January, you really need to be seeking this information, the BTI, as soon as possible. At present, there's quite a specific question here now in relation to bringing cheese in. At present, there's an 8-digit number for cheese from the UK. Is it correct that this will now be, it'll become a 10-digit code?
For
now, it's cheese in the generic sense. I'm not sure, do we need to bring that down further?
Yeah, in order to import cheese from the UK, yes, you will need a 10-digit code to import from the UK. So you will need to find the extra 2 digits that are required. When you go into Tariff and you're looking at the code, you go until you get to the blue code. In some cases, that actually might be an 8-digit code, which means that you just add 2 zeros in that case. But if it goes down to a 10-digit, it's the 10-digit code.
Okay, and I think, again, the tar class at revenue.ie, if somebody wants to confirm that, they can post queries to yourselves. I'm afraid I probably know the answer to this question, but somebody is asking if they're importing parts for vehicles, does each part need a code?
Yes. Yeah.
On the valuation side, on the valuation, on the revenue website, it states an amount of over 20,000 must make valuation declarations. Does this apply to amounts less than 20,000?
The simple answer is no, it doesn't. You don't need a valuation declaration if the value is under 20,000.
So they're exempt from making a...
Yeah, the declaration, they are. The declaration has a series of questions based on whether additions are necessary to the invoice price, such as are the parties related or have all costs been included.
Okay.
So, and I think though, Jerry, this is a separate declaration.
Sorry, Caroline,
it's the DV1.
Yes.
It's an additional declaration. So if your import value is over 20,000 euros, you're legally obliged to complete this extra declaration. So the full details of that are on the revenue website. So if it's under the 20,000, then you don't need to do that.
Great. So we've made a point about the additional charges that need to be reflected. So if somebody is asking a question around what information should appear on the commercial invoice in terms of the freight charges. So what's the level of detail, what needs to be on the invoice for them to be able to feed in to come up with the valuation that they need to declare?
Well, preferably just a statement of value for the transport costs charged by the freight carrier.
Okay.
And that's the standard that's usually there.
So they will get an estimate or get a quote from the carrier, put that onto the invoice.
Yes.
And just to say, if to exclude the transport costs within the EU, that would need to be broken out on the invoice as well.
Okay.
To be able to exclude those costs.
Look, I think it's going to be a feature of all of the sessions, is a feature of all of the sessions today. We're into technical sessions. There's a lot of nuances behind each of these. I hope we've touched off some of the questions that people have had an interest in today. Again, the email address for TAR class at revenue.ie, the website for both valuation and classification. Obviously, Carol Ann's presentation is going to be live in the coming days. And she has mapped out quite a lot of detail about the process and a case study example there. So look, I hope all of those in the round will be of help. And certainly, I won't even say as a last resort, but for very specific questions, you can come back to either the TAR class or in a more general sense to Brexit queries at revenue.ie. So I would like to thank Jerry and Patricia and Carol Ann. Thank you very much. We're moving into the next session on the movement of prohibited and restricted goods, and that is at 12 o'clock. So thanks very much. We'll see you then.